Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
This Week at Work is the only show about the workplace that offers you front row seats and a microphone featuring experts in human resources and employment law to bring you practical, timely, and accurate insights so you can more effectively lead your organization. It's Thursday, September 26th, episode 297. Today, is trust breaking down in your workplace? In part 2 of our 3-part series covering the top issues being called out in employee surveys today, we're driving deep into one of the biggest, trust issues between employees and leadership. So what's causing the disconnect? Communication breakdowns? The post-pandemic work environment? Or maybe inconsistent management? We'll be joined by Tanya, who's out in the field hearing it all. She'll break down what's really driving the erosion of trust and share what's working to stop the runoff. You don't want to miss these real solutions to a growing problem you can't afford to ignore. All this and more on This Week at Work.
Good morning. Welcome back, everyone. Bert, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Phil. I'm doing well. I'm a little tired. I've been on the road a little bit lately.
You know, I got to tell you, our listeners wouldn't know this, but yesterday I get in the car and I'm taking a nice leisurely drive. We're going to a speaking conference engagement down in southeast Missouri, a place I hold near and dear to my heart. I lived there for quite a while. I walk into the conference facility, into the grand ballroom, and as I'm getting closer to the doors, I hear this voice and I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. I know that voice. Please tell me it's not true. And I open up the doors and I walk in, the room is filled with people, and there's Bert Garland right on stage, center stage, and talking to the audience. I'm like, I can't get away from this guy no matter how far I travel. You're always right there, Bert, kind of like chirping in my ear, a little bit of shoulder there. But it's always good to be back with you here with our audience. I know they love you. And with us always, and fan favorite, part 2 of a 3-part series is Tanya Zion. Welcome back, Tanya.
Good morning.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about trust. Can't wait to get into that. That's a great topic for us. But if you missed our part 1 of the series on quick quitters, you can go back and check that out. All of our episodes are available on your favorite podcast station, YouTube, our website. Check it out. We make it really easy. You can watch it while you're in the dentist, the DMV, whatever it is, wherever you are, it's available for you.
Phil, the dentist and the DMV, are those errands you're running in the same day? You need a more exciting life.
And my eye appointment this week, right? So those are my 3 appointments this week I have to get done. So that's just what comes to mind.
You had to see me live.
We don't script this out. We're just kind of going. We're real people, right? This isn't scripted. We're just going with the flow. But let's get on with the program, and I want to get started with our poll question. How have trust issues between employees and leaders been affected by the pandemic? So it's a good question, producer Nick. How has trust issues between employees and leaders been affected by the pandemic? And I can't wait to hear some of Tanya's take on this, because she's out working every day in the field with our members and their employees and their leadership team, and she's going to give us a peek inside of what's going on. So got some great responses there. Improved, remained the same, eroded, significantly declined. We'd like to get your opinion, so please participate and give us a chat if there's something more you want to tell us about it. All right, Bert, are you ready for Lawyer on the Clock?
You're rolling today, Phil. Of course I'm ready.
All right. Well, I've had a lot of Starbucks here this morning. Kind of got an early start, so I'm all jacked up on caffeine.
Well, not only that, I did see you yesterday before you departed the program yesterday. Dairy Queen, who was down there helping to sponsor, was nice enough to bring in a little frozen cart full of something I hadn't heard the term used in years, dilly bars.
Dilly bar, yeah.
I saw you sneak over there. You got the first one out of that.
If you were watching carefully, I was helping them push that cooler of dilly bars into the room. And as soon as they plugged it in and walked away, I had to give myself a sample. I love
Phil's
a good
hyped
dilly
up
bar.
on Starbucks and dilly bars.
I love a good dilly bar. If it's sweet, I like it. All right, let's get on to Lawyer on the Clock. You ready, Bert?
Ready.
Okay, Nick, pull that lever.
All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
Bill, I thought we'd do something a little bit different today. And Tanya, I'd love to have you chime in as well. But given where we are at this time of the year, I think we're about 5-6 weeks away from the presidential election. Weird election season. Of course, just not as much banter out there maybe as in past years. Not as many yard signs out there as in past years. But I think things are really going to heat up in the last few weeks down the home stretch here, and we've already seen some shocking events take place. Between the primary candidate on the left dropping out, the primary candidate Trump on the right being two attempts at assassination. So I do think that there's going to be a lot more coming down the pike in these last few weeks. But hey, I'm just one opinion out there. But what I thought we would do is take a little bit deeper dive into regulating political expression in the workplace. Rather than covering our, general 2, 3, 4 topics, we'll take a crack at this first topic. And this this segment is really targeted most at private sector employers. And I want to make it very clear that the First Amendment, the constitutional First Amendment, does not protect political speech in private workplaces. So in the public sector, a little bit different, quite a bit different actually. But in the private sector, the First Amendment does not apply. So
you're saying, Bert, if I'm talking to a group of employees and somebody's getting upset because I'm trying to cool the conversation in the workplace and refocus it back on productivity, and someone goes, hey, it's my First Amendment. There's freedom of speech here. I can say what I want, when I want to say it, where I want to say it.
That's right. You have the right to say the First Amendment. I'm not a governmental agency that's regulating political speech, and so my rules apply over the First Amendment here in the workplace.
All right. Yeah. Now, not everybody knows that. I'm clearly aware of that because I do hear that quite a bit from people of all levels, management, and often management's not aware of, well, what can I say? What should I say? And that is going to really get into an issue of trust that we're going to talk with Tanya about as well, being informed. So
that's
go on,
right.
Bert, I'm sorry.
So that's all right. So most states allow, therefore, the employers, private sector employers, to regulate employees' political activities, with some exceptions that I'll talk about in a minute, that protect against discrimination based on political affiliation. Now, employers definitely can engage in political discussions if they want to and express their views, but they have to be very careful about to avoid coercing their employees regarding voting. States that have laws to prevent retaliation against employees for political expression, there's several of them, but also importantly, employers also have the right not to engage in political expression in the workplace. So, my opinion on this is that employers are made up of many different employees with different types of beliefs. Most employers are out there, for-profit, nonprofit. They have clients, they have customers, and they come from all over the political spectrum. And so as an employer, I always encourage employers to avoid wading into this. Now, there's a couple of other things that you have to be really careful of. First of all, the National Labor Relations Act, that protects employees who engage in political activities if those political activities relate to their working conditions, their terms and conditions of employment. So if they're engaged in a political activity because they think you pay an unfair wage and they want to engage in political expression because they believe one party is going to advocate for increasing the wages, if they tie that to their terms and conditions of employment, employers really have to be careful how they handle those political discussions to avoid violating employees.
Okay, great. So this is good, right? So I have heard both candidates say now that we would like to not tax restaurant tip workers. You get your tips, they're not taxed. And let's just hypothetically say I put a Trump badge on or a Harris badge on, either way. because I'm in favor as a restaurant worker of not being taxed on my tips. And the worker or the employer says, hey, you got to take that off while we're working.
Yeah, so the employer can definitely tell the employee to take the badge off or the insignia off, especially if it's interfering or not part of the uniform. But you know, just because if you get beyond the badge, then into discussion, if they're tying that political discussion to their terms and conditions of employment, I think the employer has to allow that. There have been some cases that have gone back and forth at the NLRB with employees in particular during the Black Lives Matters protests several years ago. They several employees at Home Depot, and I think it was Starbucks as well, had insignia, Black Lives Matter insignia on their uniforms, and the cases have kind of gone back and forth on this. I do believe ultimately when this gets into the court system that the courts are going to say that the employer has a right to protect their uniform. But as far as political expression in the workplace, again, if they're tying it to their terms and conditions of employment, we can't discriminate or retaliate against that.
So
the other one
I have
is
another question here for you, Bert. So as I drive across the country from time to time, going to these strange places where I walk in, and there you are, and there might be like a phrase for that. You know, I'm not sure if you're harassing me, following me, whatever that is. But anyway,
hey, if you're walking in and I'm already there, you're following me.
yeah. What about a scenario of and I'm not just trying to create scenarios. These are things that come to mind as you talk about it that represent employers that we work with. So we work with several farms, and they produce produce or meats and packing and these types of things, and they may have on their barn on the top, they might have big Trump letters up on top of their barn. And so the employer in this case is promoting their political expression. Does that give a farm worker the right then to equally promote their political expression?
No, it still does not. Again,
Okay.
the farm worker, if they can promote their political expression, if they're tying their political expression to their terms and conditions of
Okay.
employment.
Gotcha.
Okay, so there's a distinction there. Again, like I said, employers can engage, employers can engage in political expression, but they also have the right to refrain from doing that. If an employer chooses to do that, that's their choice as an organization, and employees can counter speak to that if it is tied to their terms and conditions of employment. Okay.
Right.
So there's
Now
also
that one last question. I know you got a lot you want to get to. Now
I
that
do.
applies to those protected, I'm assuming, under the National Relations Act, right? NLRA.
The National Labor Relations Act, correct.
So for those that are not protected by the act, is the rules different? I've been in businesses as part of management where I've been highly encouraged to donate to political campaigns and different causes that would be in the best interest of the business. And of course, you know, we wouldn't necessarily do that for those protected by the act. Is there a gray area, or is it left undecided as it relates to those not protected by the act?
Yeah, so Phil, I think when you're talking about those not protected by the act, you're talking about people who are excluded from the act, which are supervisors in this case. And so what you're describing is a situation where the employer goes to its managerial level employees and says, hey, we want you to contribute to this political campaign. And if you don't, you're going to get discharged. And so again, I would encourage employers to wade very carefully in doing that. There's nothing that prohibits an employer from encouraging its employees from contributing to a campaign or a political party. But there are other protections out there.
Okay.
There's also EEO concerns. There's state law concerns about that. In particular, well, let me talk about the EEO concerns first. So political discussions can obviously lead to claims of discrimination, harassment, especially if they intersect with protected characteristics like race or gender. And so employers also need to be really careful to navigate the tensions between the EEO laws as well and political expression in the workplace. Now, there are several states out there that have enacted laws prohibiting mandatory meetings about political topics and protecting employees' off-duty political activities. Those laws provide varying degrees of protection for employees' rights to express their political views. Not surprisingly, when you hear this list, you won't be surprised about some of these states on here, in particular, California, Colorado, Connecticut, DC, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. Now, those states' laws that prohibit discrimination based on political affiliation or protect employees from retaliation for political activities and discussions, they vary. They vary from state to state. And the only one that I named off there that you have members in is Illinois. And so Illinois does have a law that protects employees from discrimination based on their political activities and their affiliations. And so, again, you need to check the state law on this. And that would include employees have the right to express their political views and engage in political activities outside of work without fear of retaliation. That would include the right to campaign for candidates or causes, but that does not protect the employees in the workplace while they're working. So, but employers also, excuse me, are prohibited from taking adverse action against employees based on their political expression, including termination, demotion, or harassment. So employers in Illinois need to be very, very careful. The last thing I'll leave you with here are two things. First of all, social media and off-duty conduct. Employees increasingly use social media for political expression, and employers must be very careful not to infringe on privacy laws or retaliate for speech, off-duty speech. So the best practice I could recommend would include drafting clear or communicating clear policies on political speech. Very importantly, consistent enforcement of those policies, training for management, and being prepared for potential disruptions related to political discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a really good reminder, Bert. No doubt it does heat up, and I do get questions about it, and it comes up as part of a conversation. And I think it's a great transition right into trust in the conversation with Tanya, because in essence, that's what we're really talking about here. And you peel that onion back, it comes down to, do we trust each other? Do we trust in our processes and procedures? And can one group, management group, trust the employee group? And, are we one group or two groups? And Tanya, I'm going to invite you right into the conversation. Anything that you would add to that as we transition?
Yeah, so I absolutely love when Bert comes on and gives us kind of the legal boundaries,
Oh,
right?
you're going to stroke his ego now. Don't tell him you absolutely love Bert when he comes on.
Well, I think a lot of our members appreciate the legal guidance. And
Thanks, Tanya.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. But I think about my grandma. And I think my grandma gives a lot of guidance in how we can show up and be leaders. And one of the key things that I was taught was be kind and be polite. So I went to authority on politeness, and I looked to see what Emily Post had to say about this topic. And there actually is an article about bringing politics into the workplace. And I think what we have to remember as leaders is there is this big sandbox legally that we're allowed to play in. But what we have to think is, what is our goal in the culture that we're trying to create in our work environments? And that's a sense of belonging, right? We've got all these different people coming from different backgrounds. And what I need as a leader is to have them come in the workplace and be productive. And so Emily Post gave a few points that I think are relevant that I want to share. And the first is, if you're going to bring up political speech, and I think this applies for leaders or employees is what's your goal, right? Are you truly seeking information? Are you hoping to change a mind? Are you venting frustrations? And I think if you just take a moment and use the power of the pause to go, you know what, I really feel this way, but really what's going to help if I bring this up? I think that's a really important thing to say. And Bert talked about social media and the impact on that on employee rights. And here's some statistics. 24% of adults do share political information online, but 39% of US adults say they choose not to associate with people with different political backgrounds. And so think about the impact that that has, right? If we bring a squarely controversial topic into the workplace, is that bringing people together, or does it have the potential to divide? And if it has the potential to divide, it goes against really what you've promised your shareholders. So create a sense of belonging, create a safe space so we can focus on work. And I think that's important. Emily goes on to say, well, Emily Post organization goes on to say, beware of the overshare, assume nothing, and then know when to agree to disagree. And I think that's the thing sometimes we have to step away. But I think that kind of ties into what we're talking about in trust. And so I thought these were some good guidelines that even though we may have the legal right to do something, we as leaders have to take a step back and say, what am I ultimately driving for and what's going to get me there?
Absolutely. That's some very good insight into that. Nick, I don't know how the poll's coming. I'm going to give members and our listeners and one more chance to participate before we can take a look at those results. But Tanya, if I can maybe have you kick off a little bit more and tell us, every day you're working with either a group of our members, employees, or with the leadership team themselves. And I know they're struggling to resolve trust issues. Tell us, what you consider to be trust issues. When we say trust issues, it's a great big word. What does that mean in most cases with you?
So it really takes on two different veins. One is maybe culturally we don't have a trust, right? And I've been on here and we've talked about that in terms of psychological safety. Do I trust that, I'm going to get the feedback that I need? Am I still going to have a job? Am I secure here? So there's that element that I think plays into trust. But really, when I was approached with what is trending right now and what I'm seeing in the surveys, it's really more related to leadership teams. And I think there's several reasons why we're seeing a struggle with trust in leadership teams. And believe it or not, I don't know how long we're going to point back to the pandemic, but I do think that it's the root cause in some of this, right? We distributed workforces, we hired new leaders, and we didn't go through that normal process of like getting to know each other and working. Or maybe you didn't bring a new person to your team, but everybody went into the mode of let's keep the doors open. And so we siloed our businesses in a lot of instances. We changed up processes without communicating. And so it does create this uncertainty. And when I'm going in and leaning in and working with leadership teams, there's still a lot of apprehension around, can I say this? And, am I safe? Are we going to change things? And I see a lot of territorial behavior among leadership teams.
Yeah, when I think about that and you think about what happened during the pandemic, and we actually saw an increase in some really core measurements of trust and engagement early on in the pandemic. And most of that was related to, at least the information I read, was related to increased communication and leadership's engagement with the entire workforce increased, and therefore the workforce trends improved. And then as we came out of the pandemic, it started to decline, and it declined further. It reverted back, Bert.
Wait. Phil, you called me out there. So I
I'm
have
setting
to
you up
explain
here,
this.
yeah.
I have to explain it. I've made it my life's mission that every time I hear somebody use that phrase you just used,
Reverted back.
Yeah, I have to stop and refer to my old curmudgeon law professor I had, who the law library at St. Louis University is named after him, Professor Immel, may he rest in peace. But he would literally, if people would say revert back in the middle of class, he would stop and he would freeze and he would look at the person and shake his head and he'd say, well, I should hope so. I've never seen anything revert forward. So there you go, Phil.
Did he have a phrase for when we're progressing ahead or progressing forward? Yeah,
I bet he would.
Yeah, I bet he did as well.
So Phil, we don't revert back. We just revert.
So we reverted, and our revert, either way, we went backwards. And our results now are actually less than they were, 10, 15 years ago. Any insight into what's happening there, and is it based in trust in any way in your experience?
It absolutely is based in trust, but I think there's something more fundamental than that even, and that is communication. When we all didn't know what was happening, I mean, I think if I'm right, this program was happening daily, right? Because things
Right.
were changing so often, right? We were hearing from, going back to our political leaders at all levels, right? And so we were all communicating. I mean, I set up a family call to check in on my grandma daily, right? And so we were working. My grandma's been part of the show a lot, but but thinking about
We got to
how
get your grandma on this show.
she would love it. She's great. But thinking about just when we communicate, there is transparency. And when there's transparency and vulnerability, because how often did leaders come on and say, I don't know? That was powerful. That was powerful to say, I don't have all of the answers, but we're working on it. And I think too often in leadership circles, it's a really scary thing to say, we don't have the answer right now. Because as leaders, we feel responsible for all of these livelihoods of our employers or our employees. And so there was something that happened during that time. And there was almost like this dropping of the curtain. And I talked to so many employees that think, it's like the great Wizard of Oz behind the curtain of what happens in those executive leadership team meetings. And I try to break it to them. It's really nothing magical. It's really just a lot of people trying to make really good decisions with limited resources.
Yeah,
And
you're
Tanya,
so right in that, Tanya. There isn't a magic that occurs in those rooms. And I've been a part of some very large global organizations in the leadership room. And it is a group of people trying to make the best decisions they can with whatever information they have, intuition, their gut. And when you have to go out and express and say, I don't know, the reason that's so scary is that people expect you to know, and they criticize that you don't know. Right? It's like you get criticized for how can you not know? I would think that would be one of the first things you would discover. I don't understand how this is not a price, and you get really criticized. And it takes a lot to stand up and go, I don't know, I'm not sure, don't know when I'll know, we're working on it. And for many people, it sounds like an excuse or an escape, but it's simply, we just don't know yet.
well,
Yeah.
I want to bring up one point here, and this is really how I see employers being able to build trust with employees. It's okay if you don't know, but what you don't want to do is ignore the issue. And what Tanya said is very important. You tell the employee, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And not only am I going to find out, but when I find out, I'm going to come back and communicate that to you. And if it's going to take me a while to find out, I'm going to keep you posted on what I'm learning, but I will get you an answer. And so, if you're going to tell an employee you don't know something, I think that's acceptable, but not seeking out the answer and then failing to follow up. That is the number one way to blow trust in the workplace.
Well said, Bert. I think that's absolutely right. And we can look at that on the macro level in organizations, but I think this is also happening at the micro level on executive leadership teams. And so if you are the CEO, if you are the president of an organization, saying to your executive team, it's okay if you don't know. I trust that you're going to work on it, right? Because so often if I'm head of finance and I've got, head of ops in the room, I don't want to say I don't know, right? Because that's vulnerable. There's fear there. But what we know about how teams come together is that we've got to get through what I refer to as like a storming phase so that we can get to productive. And just what I'm witnessing, it's just kind of hard to do that. Coming out of the pandemic, I think we all have a higher level of anxiety. It's really easy to find those statistics out there. And I think it's making its way into our leadership rooms. And so I would just encourage anybody that's listening to this show as an actionable item is have this conversation with your leadership team, right? Lay out clearly what your expectations are and give permission that, hey, if you don't know, that's why we work together. We can solve it together.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. I've been a part of conversations where someone may say, I don't know, or maybe I've said, I don't know, or someone says it to me, I don't know, as the CEO. And while I don't think I've ever said this, I know I've had it said. Well, I pay you to know, you better go find out. right? I mean, that's not an unusual response from somebody who's feeling pressure and needs information so they can make the best decision. And that right there, then, I mean, the moment something like that occurs, your trust is going to be eroded and it's going to be very difficult to recover. And then people start to create their opinions as facts. And that becomes really scary when, we have jobs and businesses at stake that are employing lots of people.
I would say it's not just scary, it's irresponsible. Because, and I'll go back to the original thing from the, the post, Emily Post site, right? What is the goal of the conversation? And we as leaders have to be able to execute the pause. And what I mean by that is things are going to get emotional. There are high stakes everywhere, but good leaders define themselves by being able to take a beat and say, okay, what is the next right thing that I need to do to advance whatever this problem is? And that, in my mind, is what leaders get paid to do. They navigate in uncertain times.
So Tanya, what is it that you're doing when you're working with our members to help regain, rebuild, or create more trust in the workplace? What is it that you and AIM are doing there?
I come in and ask the hard questions.
Don't say I don't know either. That's not okay.
I make uncomfortable situations, right? I go in and try to establish my trust, right? We do that by doing the surveys. I get to know the leadership team. I clearly articulate where we are and where we want to go, right? And I get people to come along with me. We acknowledge we have a problem. We acknowledge there's a gap between where we are today and where we ultimately need to be the most effective team. And then we do the hard work. I have heard a counselor say, in the Shawshank Redemption, he didn't walk out the front door, he crawled through the sewer, right? And sometimes to get to trust, to get through that, it's a little ugly. But I can tell you, leader after leader has said, you have to keep coming back because you make it uncomfortable and you ask the hard questions. So Phil, that's what I'm doing.
And I think what helps, and I know this from speaking with our members after you've worked with them, is one is that you do establish trust very quickly. And the toughest issue that they have to overcome is the management team has to trust the process from the beginning. And that is not always something you walk into, right? It's about building trust. Someone has the idea, whether it was the HR manager, whether it was the CEO, but then we have to get finance and supply chain and engineering and everybody involved, and at a level of trust that then allows us to go out and work to help them move their organization forward. And that's usually where that circle of trust is going to have to start before you move through the organization and help improve the organization as it moves forward. Anyway, that's why you work with Tanya. She's got her finger on the pulse. She does such a good job with our members all the time. The only problem we have is that we can't just clone her and have 5 or 6 of them. We're not there with AI yet, but as soon as we do, Tanya, we're going to clone you first.
Oh, okay. Bert, I might need some representation on that.
I might have a conflict of interest.
He's got
there.
a conflict of interest there. Yeah, and I'll remind him of that. But anyway, Tanya, thanks again. That was part 2. Go back and check out part 1. Tanya will be on in a couple weeks, and we'll finish part 3 of that segment. Bert, thanks for the insight and the guidance on political conversations in the workplace. We very much appreciate that. We will be back here next week at 7:30. See you then. Until then, go be good to somebody. Bye-bye.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link, aimea.org/This Week at Work, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment. LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're everywhere you are. Don't forget you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.